The freight scanner beeped twice and went silent. David Park glanced at the device, saw nothing unusual, and continued walking down the dim corridor of Section 7C. His lunch bag rustled against his hip with each step. The storage area smelled like old metal and dust, exactly the way he liked it. No crowds here. No forced conversations with coworkers who always asked too many questions about his weekend plans or family back on Earth. He turned the corner, expecting to find his usual spot near the old compression units. But someone had stacked new cargo containers right where he always sat. David sighed and looked around. The section stretched out in front of him, filled with forgotten shipments and unclaimed boxes from companies that went bankrupt decades ago. Meridian Gate kept everything for 100 years before disposal. Legal requirement that a flat surface near some display cases caught his eye. Good enough. David walked over and sat down on the floor, back against the wall. He pulled out his sandwich and opened his thermos. The soup inside was still warm, vegetable and rice, the same thing his grandmother used to make when he was small. The memory didn't hurt as much anymore. 5 years since the mining accident. 5 years since he lost everyone. He took a bite and chewed slowly. The silence felt comfortable here. Nobody rushing past. Nobody asking him to fix something immediately. Just him and the quiet hum of the station's life support systems running through the walls. David started humming without really thinking about it. An old song his grandmother taught him. Something about mountains and rivers back on Earth. The melody was simple, the kind that stuck in your head for days. He hummed between bites, letting the tune fill the empty space around him. The display case beside him held what looked like a large stone. Smooth and gray, about the size of a beach ball. The label was faded, but he could make out a few words. Property of Draconis Collective. Decorative sculpture. David had seen the Draconis species before, tall reptilian beings who walked like they owned every station they visited. They probably did own most of them. He kept humming and drinking his soup. The stone in the case looked ordinary. Just another forgotten piece of cargo gathering dust while the galaxy moved on without it. David understood that feeling. Something changed in the air, a warmth that hadn't been there before. David looked up from his thermos and stared at the case. The stone was glowing. Faint, barely visible, but definitely glowing. A soft golden light pulsed from somewhere inside it. David set down his lunch and stood up slowly. He moved closer to the case, watching the stone carefully. A thin crack appeared on the surface, running from top to bottom like a lightning bolt frozen in place. The glow grew stronger. The crack widened. This was not a stone. His hand reached toward the glass case without permission from his brain. The moment his palm touched the surface, the object inside split completely in half. Pieces of shell fell away, and something moved in the center. Something alive that a small creature tumbled out onto the bottom of the case, all awkward limbs and folded wings. It was covered in dark scales that caught the light like oil on water. The creature opened its eyes and looked directly at David through the glass. Those eyes were bright gold, intelligent and aware that IT chirped. A sound like a bird, but deeper, more musical. The creature struggled to stand on wobbly legs, shook itself, and chirped again. Its gaze never left David's face. Alarms started screaming throughout the section. Red lights flashed along the ceiling. David heard boots pounding down the corridor, coming fast. Security teams by the sound of it. But he couldn't look away from the small creature in the case. It was pressing itself against the glass now, reaching one clawed hand toward where his palm still rested on the outside. A dragon. That was a dragon hatchling. David had seen pictures in the station database. The Draconis species raised them as partners, bonded companions that fought beside them. But dragons only existed on the Draconis homeworld. They weren't supposed to be here, hidden in storage and labeled as decorative sculpture. The security team burst around the corner, weapons drawn. Their leader, a Quellan with 4 arms, shouted something about stepping away from the case. David heard the words, but they seemed distant and unimportant. The hatchling was still reaching for him, still chirping in that musical voice. David made a choice without really understanding why. He found a case latch and opened it. The dragon hatchling immediately climbed up his arm and settled against his chest, wrapping its tail around his waist. It was warm, almost hot to the touch. The creature pressed its head under his chin and made a sound like a cat purring mixed with crackling fire. The security team froze. Their leader lowered his weapon slowly, all four arms falling to his sides. His expression shifted from anger to complete confusion. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The alarms kept blaring, but they seemed very far away now. David looked down at the hatchling clinging to him. It looked back up with those gold eyes and chirped once more. This time, David understood somehow, without words or explanation. The creature was saying hello. The creature was saying home. The creature was saying you. His grandmother's song was still running through his head. David started humming it again, very quietly. The dragon hatchling's purring grew louder. Someone finally shut off the alarms. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise. David sat on the floor, exactly where the security team told him to sit. The dragon hatchling refused to leave his lap. Every time someone tried to pick it up, the creature hissed and small sparks shot from its nostrils. Dr. Nth arrived 30 minutes later. The Draconis physician was tall, scaled in deep green, and looked at David the way someone might look at a stain on expensive furniture. He knelt beside the open case and examined the broken shell pieces, turning them over in his clawed hands. His long tail swished back and forth with agitation. 127 years, Dr. Nth said quietly. His voice was rough, like stones grinding together. This egg sat here for 127 years. The Quellan security leader shifted his weight. We thought it was a sculpture. The labels said sculpture. Labels can be wrong. Dr. Nth stood and walked toward David. The hatchling pressed closer against David's chest and growled, a tiny sound that would have been cute if not for the genuine warning behind it. The doctor stopped walking. Fascinating. The imprint has already formed. Imprint. David found his voice finally. It came out smaller than he intended. Dragons bond with the first being they see upon hatching, the first being they sense. Sight, smell, sound, emotional resonance. Dr. Nth tilted his head, studying David like a specimen under glass. It is instinctive and absolute. Once formed, the bond cannot be broken without severe psychological damage to both parties. David looked down at the hatchling. It looked back at him and chirped softly. He felt something when it made that sound. Not just heard it, but felt it somewhere in his chest. A warmth that had nothing to do with the creature's body temperature. So what happens now? David asked. Now we have a problem. Dr. Nth turned to the security leader. Contact Station Commander Rallis immediately and send a message to the Draconis Collective on Cinder. Tell them we have a hatching situation. The Quellan nodded and spoke quietly into his communicator. David wanted to ask more questions, but Dr. Nth was pacing now, tail swishing faster. The doctor muttered to himself in a language David didn't understand. It sounded angry. Station Commander Rallis arrived within the hour. She was Quellan like the security leader, with pale blue skin and intelligent eyes. She looked at David, looked at the hatchling, and sighed deeply. All four of her hands went to her hips. Explain, she said to Dr. Nth. The human was eating lunch. Alone. The egg responded to something about his presence and hatched. The hatchling imprinted on him before security arrived. Can we reverse it? No. Can we transfer the imprint to a proper Draconis guardian? No. Commander Rallis looked at David again. What is your name? David Park. Maintenance engineer, 2nd class. How long have you worked on my station, David Park? 2 years and 4 months. Have you ever been in trouble before? No, ma'am. She nodded slowly and turned back to Dr. Nth. What does Draconis law say about this situation? The law is absolute. The bonded must raise the hatchling. There are no exceptions. Dr. Nth stopped pacing. But there has never been a case of cross-species imprinting. Dragons bond with Draconis. Only Draconis. This should not be possible. Yet here we are, Commander Rallis said. The impossible is sitting on my station floor. The hatchling chose that moment to climb up David's shoulder and perch there like a bird. It was heavier than it looked. The creature nuzzled against his neck, and that purring sound started again. David reached up carefully and touched its head. The scales felt warm and smooth. The hatchling leaned into his touch. It trusts him Dr. Nth said quietly. There was something in his voice that hadn't been there before. Not quite respect, but close to it. Complete trust. I can see the neural bonding in its eye dilation and body language. Commander Rallis pulled out a datapad and typed something quickly. The collective will want the hatchling returned. They will argue that a human cannot properly raise a dragon. They will cite tradition, law, and species compatibility. What do you think will happen? David asked. The question came out before he could stop it. The commander met his eyes. I think you are about to become the center of a very complicated legal situation. Dr. Nth is correct about the bonding law. It is sacred to the Draconis. They cannot break it without dishonoring their entire culture. But they will not be happy about a human keeping one of their dragons. This is a royal egg, Dr. Nth added. He was examining the shell pieces again. These markings indicate noble lineage. This hatchling would have been raised by a high-ranking family. David felt his stomach drop. Royal, extremely royal. The hatchling chirped and licked David's ear with a small forked tongue. It tickled. David couldn't help but smile a little despite the situation. The creature seemed pleased with itself. Commander Rallis finished typing and looked up. I have sent our report to the collective. They will respond within 24 hours. Until then, David Park, you are confined to quarters. The hatchling stays with you. Dr. Nth will provide basic care instructions and monitor the situation. Am I in trouble? That depends entirely on what the collective decides. The commander's expression softened slightly. For what it matters, I do not believe you did anything wrong. You were eating lunch. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor about these things. Dr. Nth approached again, moving slower this time. The hatchling watched him, but didn't growl. The doctor handed David a datapad. Feeding schedule. Temperature requirements. Basic commands. Read all of it tonight. I will, David promised. One more thing, human. Dr. Nth met his eyes. Dragons are not pets. They are partners. Equals. If you treat this hatchling as anything less, the bond will suffer. Do you understand? David looked at the small creature on his shoulder. It looked back at him with those bright gold eyes. I understand. We shall see, Dr. Nth said. The transport ship vibrated slightly as it entered faster than light travel. David sat in his small cabin, watching the stars stretch into lines through the porthole. The hatchling was curled in his lap, bigger now than it had been just 1 week ago, already the size of a medium dog. Dr. Nth said dragons grew fast in their first months. Something about accelerated development to prepare for bonding trials. David had named the creature Ash. Simple name. It seemed to fit. Ash's scales were darker now, almost black with hints of deep blue when the light caught them right. The gold eyes were brighter and more focused. More intelligent every day. The response from the Draconis Collective had come exactly as Commander Rallis predicted. Return the hatchling immediately. The human is not suitable. This is an insult to tradition, but they could not break their own sacred law. The bond was formed, so they offered a compromise that felt more like a threat. David would travel to Cinder, the Draconis homeworld, and stand before the High Court. They would test his worthiness. If he passed, he could keep Ash. If he failed, they would find another way to handle the situation. Nobody explained what another way meant, but David could guess that he had 30 days to prepare. He spent most of that time reading everything he could find about dragons and Draconis culture. The data pad Dr. Nth gave him became his constant companion. He learned about dragon development, dietary needs, and the bonding process. He learned about Draconis history, their values, their traditions built around strength and fire. Ash learned too. The hatchling was smart, scary smart. David would hum his grandmother's song, and Ash would try to copy the melody, chirping along in a way that almost matched the tune. When David read aloud from the datapad, Ash would tilt its head and listen carefully, as if understanding every word. A knock on the cabin door interrupted his thoughts. David gently moved Ash aside and stood up. He opened the door to find a Draconis woman standing in the corridor. She was young, maybe equivalent to a human in her 20s, with bright red scales and nervous energy in the way she held herself. David Park? She asked. Yes. My name is Petra. I'm a cultural scholar. May I speak with you? David hesitated, then stepped aside to let her enter. The cabin was small, barely enough room for 2 people and a growing dragon. Petra sat in the only chair. Ash immediately climbed into David's lap when he sat on the bed, positioning itself between him and the visitor. Protective already, Petra observed. That is a good sign. A good sign of what? That the bond is genuine. Petra pulled out her own datapad. I have been following your case. It is quite famous now. Everyone in the collective is talking about the human who bonded with a royal dragon. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I know. That is what makes it interesting. Petra leaned forward slightly. May I ask you something? What were you doing when the egg hatched? Eating lunch, humming an old song, and you were alone? Yes, I usually eat alone. Petra typed something on her pad. Dragons respond to emotional resonance. The Draconis perform ceremonial chants to help eggs hatch, specific frequencies that stimulate the life inside. Your humming must have created a similar frequency, but that is only part of it. The egg would not have responded unless it sensed something else, something in your emotional state. David thought about that moment in the storage section, how he had felt peaceful, content in his solitude, missing his grandmother but not hurting from the loss anymore. Just remembering with warmth instead of pain. I was happy, he said quietly. In my own way, that is rare in the galaxy. Petra smiled a little. Genuine contentment. Most beings are always wanting something more, something different. Dragons sense that restlessness and it makes them uncomfortable. But peace, true peace, that calls to them. Ash chirped and nuzzled David's hand. He scratched behind the small horns starting to grow on the dragon's head. The purring sound started up again. Why are you helping me? David asked. The others of your kind seem angry that I exist. Petra's expression grew more serious. Because I believe the galaxy is bigger than our traditions. I study other species, their cultures, their ways of thinking. Most Draconis believe we are superior because we bond with dragons. But what if dragons bond with us because we possess certain qualities, not because of our scales or our fire? You think humans have those qualities? I think you do, and that terrifies the High Court. Petra stood up, moving toward the door. They will test you, David. Not just your courage or strength, but your connection with Ash. They will try to break what they do not understand. Will I pass? That depends on what passing means to you. She paused at the door. The court expects you to act like a Draconis, to show dominance and power. But that is not what Ash needs from you. Remember that. After Petra left, David sat quietly with Ash for a long time. The dragon had fallen asleep in his lap, breathing slow and steady. David hummed the old song again, very softly. Ash's ear twitched, but the creature didn't wake. Through the porthole, the stars continued their stretched dance. Somewhere ahead, in that blur of light, was Cinder, the homeworld, the place where everything would be decided. David wasn't a fighter. He wasn't particularly brave or strong. He was just an engineer who liked quiet spaces and vegetable soup. But Ash had chosen him anyway. Or maybe he had chosen Ash. Maybe that was the same thing 0.2 weeks past in steady routine. Feeding schedules, training exercises, learning to understand the subtle ways Ash communicated. The dragon's vocabulary of chirps and growls expanded daily. David learned that a quick double chirp meant hungry, a low rumble meant uncertain, and a high trill meant happy. Ash learned that David's tone of voice mattered more than his words, that certain touches meant comfort and others meant pay attention. The bond grew stronger. David could feel it now, a constant awareness of Ash's emotional state. When the dragon was content, warmth spread through David's chest. When Ash was anxious, his own heart rate increased. They were becoming synchronized in ways that had nothing to do with logic or biology. The day they entered orbit around Cinder, Petra visited one final time. She brought formal clothing for David to wear before the court and a data chip containing everything she knew about the judges he would face. Remember, she said as she prepared to leave, they will try to make you doubt yourself. Do not let them. David nodded. Ash stood beside him now, already reaching his waist in height. The dragon pressed against his leg, and he rested his hand on the scaled head. They would face the court together. Whatever happened next, At least they would face it together. The grand hall stretched high above David's head, carved from volcanic rock that still held ancient heat. 7 thrones sat on a raised platform, and behind each throne coiled a fully grown dragon. The creatures were massive, beautiful, and terrifying. Their scales reflected the firelight dancing along the walls. Their eyes watched David with intelligence that made his skin prickle. The galleries were packed with Draconis citizens, hundreds of them, all watching the human who dared to claim one of their own. Their whispers echoed through the chamber like wind through a canyon. Ash walked beside David, head held high despite being barely a fraction of the size of the adult dragons. The young dragon's tail wrapped around David's leg, a constant connection. David could feel Ash's nervousness through their bond, but also determination. They would not show fear here. High Judge Crane sat in the center throne. His scales were gray with age, his body marked with scars from centuries of life. His dragon was silver, ancient beyond measure, with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. David Park of Earth, Crane's voice filled the hall without shouting. You stand accused of no crime, for our law protects the bond between dragon and guardian. However, you are not Draconis. You do not understand our ways. Therefore, we must determine if you are worthy to raise a royal hatchling. I understand, High Judge. David's voice came out steady. That surprised him. You will undergo 3 trials. First, the trial of fire, which tests courage. Second, the trial of wisdom, which tests understanding. Third, the trial of bond, which tests the connection between you and your dragon. Crane leaned forward slightly. These trials were designed for Draconis. They will be harder for you. Do you accept this challenge? I do. Then let us begin. They led David to a long corridor carved into the mountain itself. Fire burned along both sides, controlled flames that created a path of heat and pain. Draconis could walk through with minimal discomfort. Their scales protected them. David had no scales. Petra had prepared him for this. She provided cooling gel and protective wrapping for his arms and legs. It would help, but not enough. The trial required walking the entire corridor without stopping or crying out. That was the tradition. Ash had to stay at the entrance, forced to watch. The dragon growled and pulled against the handler's grip, but David knelt and placed his hand on Ash's head. Stay here, he said softly. I will be okay. Ash whined, a sound that cut through David's chest like a blade. Through their bond, he felt the dragon's distress, the desperate desire to protect him. But this was his trial to face. David stood and walked into the corridor. The heat hit him like a physical force. Even with the protective gel, his skin burned. The air seared his lungs with each breath. He focused on putting one foot in front of the other. The distance seemed endless. Behind him, he heard Ash crying out, a sound no dragon should make. The pain in his chest grew worse, not from the fire, but from feeling his dragon's anguish. Halfway through, David's vision began to blur. The protective wrapping on his left arm caught fire. He wanted to stop, to put it out, to run back. But that would mean failing. That would mean losing Ash. He kept walking. The end of the corridor appeared through the waves of heat. David stumbled the last few steps and collapsed on the stone beyond the flames. Medical staff rushed forward with cooling agents and bandages. The burns were bad, 2nd degree in several places, but not fatal. Through the haze of pain, David heard Ash's voice, that musical chirp filled with relief. The dragon broke free from the handler and ran to him, pressing close and making distress sounds. David wrapped his arms around Ash's neck and held on. Trial of fire complete, Crane announced. The human did not cry out. He did not stop. The first trial is passed. They allowed David 1 hour to rest and receive treatment. Then came the trial of wisdom. They brought him back to the grand hall and seated him before the 7 judges. Ash sat beside him, refusing to leave even when ordered. We will ask 3 questions about dragon nature, Crane said. Answer correctly and you pass. Fail even 1 and you will not continue. The first question was about scale color significance in dragon lineage. David didn't know the answer, not the Draconis answer, but he thought about what Petra had taught him, about looking beyond tradition to understand truth. I cannot tell you what scale color means in your history books, David said carefully, but I can tell you what Ash's scales mean to me. They are dark like the space between stars. They reflect light like hope reflects off sorrow. They are beautiful because they are unique to this individual dragon, not because of what some chart says they should represent. The gallery murmured. Judge Sarn, who sat on Crane's left, looked angry. But Crane nodded slowly. An interesting answer. Question 2. The second question asked about ceremonial fire rituals. Again, David didn't know the traditional response. He answered with what he understood about fire itself, about how it transforms and renews, about how his grandmother used to say fire was just light learning to dance. The third question was about the bond itself. What makes a dragon choose its guardian? David thought about that moment in the storage section. The peace he felt, the song he hummed, the years of grief that had finally softened into something he could carry. I think dragons choose guardians who have learned to be honest with themselves, he said, who can sit alone without running from their own thoughts, who have found peace in small moments. Ash didn't choose me because I'm strong or special. Ash chose me because I was genuinely content eating soup in a storage room, humming my grandmother's song. Silence filled the hall. Then Crane spoke. Trial of wisdom complete. Your answers were not what we expected, but they showed understanding beyond mere knowledge. The second trial is passed. The trial of bond came next. An obstacle course designed to test synchronization between dragon and guardian. Ash would have to navigate through barriers and over walls while David directed from the ground. Perfect coordination required. They started well. Ash responded to David's hand signals and voice commands smoothly. Then David's burned ankle, weakened from the fire corridor, twisted under him. He fell hard, crying out in pain. Ash immediately stopped and turned back. The dragon wasn't supposed to do that. The trial required continuing forward regardless of the handler's condition. But Ash ignored the rules and ran back to David, positioning itself beside him. The dragon lowered its body, offering support. David understood. He pulled himself onto Ash's back. The dragon was young, not fully grown, but strong enough to carry him. They completed the course together, moving as a single unit. The gallery erupted in arguments, half shouting that this violated the trial rules, half insisting that it proved the strength of their bond. Crane raised his hand for silence. Before he could speak, alarms sounded throughout the city. The distress signal came from the mining colony on Cinder's smaller moon. Equipment failure in the deep tunnels. 200 workers trapped underground with oxygen running out. The rescue teams were already preparing to launch when Crane turned to look at David. Our rescue equipment is designed for heat and fire, the High Judge said. But the collapse mine is filled with toxic gas and unstable support structures. Our teams are not trained for those conditions. David stood up, leaning on Ash for support. His ankle throbbed with pain, but his mind was already working through the problem. Mining equipment, structural collapse, gas buildup. He had dealt with similar situations on Earth before the accident that took his family. I can help, David said. You are injured. You have no equipment. I know mining systems. I worked in deep extraction on Earth for 10 years. David pulled out his datapad and accessed the colony's structural plans. Your teams are equipped wrong for this. You need someone who understands human-style engineering. Judge Sarn stood up from his throne. This is absurd. The human seeks to manipulate us with false heroism. 200 of our people are dying. Petra's voice came from the gallery. She had stood up, facing the judges directly. If he can help, we should let him try. Crane looked at his fellow judges, then back at David. If you volunteer for this rescue, it will not affect the trial verdict. We will not be swayed by heroics. I'm not doing this for the trial, David said honestly. People are dying. I might be able to help. That's enough reason. 20 minutes later, David was on a shuttle headed for the moon, wearing borrowed rescue gear that didn't quite fit. Ash sat beside him, now big enough to be useful in a crisis. Petra came too, along with 3 Draconis rescue specialists. Dr. Inth monitored everything from the command center, his voice coming through David's comm unit. The mine entrance was chaos. Smoke poured from the main shaft. Family members of the trapped workers crowded around the perimeter, held back by security. Their faces showed the same desperate fear David remembered from Earth, from the day he got the call about his own family's mine collapse. He pushed that memory away and focused on the problem. The rescue team leader, a large draconis named Kells, showed him the scans. The main shaft collapsed here and here, Kells said, pointing at the display. Gas buildup is severe in Section 9. Our equipment can clear it, but the heat signature might ignite the mixture. David studied the layout carefully. Ash can help with that. Controlled fire breath in short bursts can burn off the gas safely without causing explosions. But we need to stabilize the support structures first, or more tunnels will collapse. Can you do that? If the equipment down, there is similar to what I work with on Earth, yes. David looked at Ash. The dragon met his eyes with complete trust. But we need to move fast. They descended into the mine in 3 teams. David and Ash took point with Petra and Kells following close behind. The temperature rose as they went deeper. David's burns ached, but he ignored them. Ash moved carefully, testing each step before putting weight on the unstable ground. The first group of trapped miners was in Section 5. 20 workers huddled together, breathing through emergency masks that were nearly depleted. They saw the rescue team, and relief flooded their faces. David noticed they were mixed species, not just draconis. Humans were there too, along with Quellen and others he didn't recognize. "We're getting you out," David told them. "Stay calm and follow instructions." He had Ash clear the gas buildup with careful flame bursts while he worked on the support beams. The structural reinforcement techniques were universal, based on physics that didn't care about species. He used emergency braces and compression locks to stabilize the tunnel enough for safe passage. They moved deeper. Section 7. Section 8. Each time, they found more miners, and each time David and Ash worked together to create a safe extraction path. David's hands were steady despite his exhaustion. Ash's control over fire improved with each attempt, the young dragon learning and adapting in real time. Section 9 was the worst. The tunnel had completely collapsed, leaving 30 workers trapped beyond a wall of rubble. Oxygen was nearly gone. They had maybe 30 minutes before people started dying. David examined the situation carefully. "We can't blast through. The whole structure will come down. Then what do?" Kells asked. "We create a new tunnel. Use support beams to shore up a path as we dig." David looked at Ash. "Your fire can melt through the softer rock. I'll handle the structural integrity." "That will take too long," Petra said quietly. "Not if I hold the main support beam while everyone evacuates." David pointed to the primary load-bearing structure. "It's already cracked. The moment we start digging, it will fail. Someone needs to brace it manually. You will be crushed. Not if we time it right." David met Petra's eyes. "I've done this before. I know what I'm doing." What he didn't say was that his family died because the person holding the support beam on Earth ran too soon. David had sworn he would never make that choice. He would hold until everyone was safe, no matter what. They started digging. Ash melted through rock, while David positioned emergency supports. The main beam groaned under increasing stress. David moved to it and braced his shoulder against the metal, feeling the enormous weight trying to collapse. Kells and Petra led the trapped miners out, one group at a time. David counted them. 28, 29, 30. Everyone accounted for. His arms shook from strain. The beam was failing. "David, move." Petra shouted. "Get clear first." "We are clear. Move now." David tried to step away, but the beam shifted too fast. It was coming down. He was going to die here, just like his family died. At least he got everyone else out first. That had to count for something. Then Ash was there between him and the collapse. The dragon wrapped around David's body and used its own form to brace the beam. Together, they held it just long enough to dive clear as the entire section came crashing down behind them. They lay in the dust and darkness, David wrapped in Ash's protective embrace. The dragon's heart beat against his chest, fast and strong. Through their bond, David felt Ash's fierce determination. The dragon would not let him die. Not today. Not ever. "Thank you," David whispered. Ash chirped softly and licked his face. David woke up 3 days later in a medical facility that smelled like antiseptic and minerals. His body ached everywhere, but he was alive. More importantly, he could feel Ash through their bond. The dragon was close by, healthy and safe. Relief washed through him stronger than any painkiller. Dr. Inth stood beside the bed, checking readings on a monitor. The Draconis physician looked tired, but something in his expression had changed. Less cold, more complicated. Your dragon refused to leave, Dr. Inth said without looking at David. We tried to move it to proper facilities. It nearly burned down the medical wing. David smiled despite the pain. Sorry about that. Do not apologize. It was quite impressive, actually. Dr. Inth finally met his eyes. You saved 150 Draconis lives yesterday, and 50 other species. The entire mining colony survived because of your actions. Because of our actions. Ash did most of the work. No, you did it together. That is the point. Dr. Inth pulled up a chair and sat down, a gesture David had never seen him make before. I have been a physician for 90 years. I have seen hundreds of bonded pairs. I thought I understood the connection between dragon and guardian. But watching you and that hatchling work in a mine, I realized I understood nothing. Through the window, David could see crowds gathered outside. Draconis citizens standing in the streets, waiting. Some held signs written in languages he couldn't read. What's happening out there? David asked. They are waiting for the High Court's verdict. Everyone in the city knows what you did. Many opinions have changed. Dr. Inth stood up. The court reconvenes in 1 hour. Can you walk? I can try. The Grand Hall was even more packed than before. Every seat filled, every standing space occupied. The 7 judges sat on their thrones with their dragons coiled behind them. But the atmosphere was completely different now. The whispers weren't hostile anymore. They were curious. Hopeful even. Ash walked beside David, moving slowly to match his injured pace. The young dragon had grown again, reaching David's chest now, scales gleaming with new strength. The burns from the mine rescue had already healed. Dragons recovered fast. High Judge Crane waited until David reached the center of the hall before speaking. David Park of Earth, the trials you underwent were interrupted by emergency. However, we have reviewed your performance in all 3 tests. We have also witnessed your actions during the mine rescue. David stood as straight as his injuries allowed. Ash pressed against his leg, offering silent support. The trial of fire tested courage. You walked through pain that would stop most beings. Past. Crane's voice echoed through the hall. The trial of wisdom tested understanding. You answered not with memorized knowledge, but with genuine insight into the nature of bonds. Past. Judge Sarn, who had opposed David from the start, stood up from his throne. The hall went silent. David prepared for objection, for one final attempt to separate him from Ash. The trial of bond-tested connection, Sarn said slowly. You completed the course together, supporting each other when one fell. Then you both descended into a collapsing mine and saved 200 lives through perfect synchronization. He paused. I objected to this arrangement initially. I believed a human could not understand the sacred bond between dragon and guardian. I was wrong. Sarn looked directly at David. You have shown us that worthiness has nothing to do with scales or fire. You have shown us that the bond transcends species when built on genuine care and respect. I formally withdraw all objections and ask forgiveness for my prejudice. The gallery erupted in whispers. David felt his throat tighten with emotion. Ash chirped softly, sensing his feelings through their connection. Crane raised his hand for silence. The High Court's verdict is unanimous. David Park, you are recognized as Ash's bonded guardian with all rights and responsibilities that entails. Furthermore, you are granted honorary citizenship of Cinder and the title of Bridgekeeper, one who connects species and builds understanding between worlds. The hall exploded with sound. Cheering, applause, the roar of dragons, acknowledging a new member of their society. David could barely process what was happening. Ash climbed up his body and perched on his shoulders, grown too large for the gesture, but attempting it anyway. The dragon's happiness flooded through their bond. Petra pushed through the crowd to reach him, her face bright with joy. You did it. You actually did it. We did it, David corrected. You helped every step of the way. What will you do now? She asked. David thought about that. About Meridian Gate and his quiet lunch spot in Section 7C. About all the species in the galaxy who didn't understand each other because they never tried to learn. About dragon eggs gathering dust in storage because nobody recognized what they were. I want to go back to Meridian Gate, he said finally, but not as a maintenance engineer. I want to start something new. A place where different species can learn about each other, where bonds can form across the barriers we build. An interspecies cooperation center, Petra said thoughtfully. I would like to help with that. Dr. Inth appeared beside them. As would I. Someone needs to ensure the medical understanding exists to support such connections. Months passed in a blur of planning and construction. Meridian Gate approved the proposal and provided space in a new section of the station. The Draconis Collective supported the project, sending resources and personnel. Other species governments expressed interest. The idea was spreading. David stood in the completed center on opening day, watching students from a dozen worlds arrive for their first classes. Ash lounged nearby, now fully grown and magnificent, scales gleaming like the space between stars. The dragon looked at him with those gold eyes and chirped the same greeting from months ago. Hello. Home. You. Petra arrived with news. 3 more dragon eggs had hatched in the past week. One bonded with a Quellan engineer, one with a human botanist, one with a species David had never heard of before. The galaxy was changing. David pulled out his thermos, still carrying it from habit. The soup was vegetable and rice, still his grandmother's recipe. He sat down on a bench and started humming that old folk song. Ash curled beside him, purring softly. Some things never need to change. The small moments of peace, the quiet connections, the songs that carry us through the dark. Everything else could grow from there.